Thank you. Thank you all. When I was in the 9th grade, one of my teachers gave me some advice. He pulled me to the side and he said to me, Markeda, you're black and you're female. You already have 2 strikes against you, so you need to get it together. I was 14 years old. Some time later, around 2011, I had my 4-year-old daughter. She was in preschool. One of her classmates came over to her and said, black girls can't talk. After my daughter told me about this incident, I went to her teacher and I asked, what's going to be done about this issue? Her teacher was deeply apologetic. She was even empathetic. And she said to me, well, we're going to have a lesson on diversity in our class. I immediately said, no. No, this is not about diversity. This is about correcting stereotypes. Correcting stereotypes for the child who said it, correcting stereotypes for her classmates who heard it, and correcting stereotypes for my daughter whose identity was targeted. A little later, my daughter came to me and she said, Mommy, why did my friends say that to me? And all I could say to my baby was that I think she's still learning. But then I thought, well, who's going to teach her? Is it her parents who admitted that they taught her this? Is it the teacher who couldn't quite discern the difference between teaching about diversity and correcting stereotypes? Who was going to teach her? And for that matter, who was going to affirm my daughter's identities? After this incident, I began to wonder, why was school the place where me and my daughter first learned that our race and our gender was a problem? For how many students is school the first place where they learn to question their identity? Unfortunately, far too many. Far too many of our students hear statements like Black lives don't matter, Jews will burn, build the wall. Far too many of our students hear these kinds of statements from their peers, from the educators who are charged with their care, and even from parents. These statements are what we refer to as identity-based bullying. Identity-based bullying is one of the most harmful and insidious forms of bullying that's occurring in our schools today. It is so harmful because this form of bullying specifically has verbal, physical, and relational aggression that is targeted towards students just by virtue of who they are. So students who are racial ethnic minorities, students who are LGBT, students who are transgender, students whose native language is not English, all of those students experience a higher rate of identity-based bullying compared to students who are not in that group. So my question for you today is, what is our responsibility as educators? Well, I'm going to tell you. First, educators must intentionally affirm students' identities and not denigrate them. How often in a school day, how often in a school week, how often in a year do we tell students to embrace their identities, to be proud of their identities, to love their identities? And for that matter, how often do we tell students to embrace and respect the identities of those who are different from them? Not nearly enough. But we couldn't stop there. In addition to affirming identities, we also need to directly denounce hate and bias wherever it occurs in the school. So, sometimes you'll hear people say, yeah, that lifestyle is wrong. That religion is wrong. And you may ask the person, why are you saying that? Well, it's just my opinion. I have a different perspective. We cannot allow hate and bias to be cloaked in the argument of different perspectives. We have to call out and stand against hate and bias whenever it occurs, in whatever form it occurs in our schools. But we can't stop there. We also have to support the students who've been targeted. We have to comfort those students who've been targeted through identity-based bullying. When I got that advice in the 9th grade, I never told anyone. Instead, I have gone through my life questioning my race and my gender. In that moment, my teacher's words changed me forever. There was no one there to stand up for 14-year-old Markeda. The harm was never repaired. And so I call on educators to comfort students who have been targeted, to affirm their identities, and to say, you're perfect just the way you are. But then we have another question. What do we do about those who espouse the hate and the bias? What is our responsibility to them as educators? And this is sometimes pretty hard, but we still have to do our jobs, and that is to educate them. We have to educate them against hate and bias. According to Teaching Tolerance, administrators and educators, all the adults in the building, struggle to address hate and bias when it occurs in the school-based setting. Their responses range from ignoring the behavior to minimizing the behavior by saying it's not that big of a deal, to suspending students, all the way to even calling the police. None of these responses give us a long-term solution. These responses instead may communicate support for the behavior or simply just punish the behavior. As educators, we cannot just dismiss and exclude those who espouse hate and bias in the school-based setting. We have to replace ignorance with knowledge. We have to teach people to empathize, to understand the pain that they're causing. And yes, we need to teach people to apologize and to repair relationships. And that's what we're doing here at Loyola. At Loyola, we're preparing the next generation of educators who will proactively, intentionally affirm students' identity. That is our foundation. We then denounce hate and bias wherever it occurs. We support students who are targeted in our schools. And we also educate those who espouse hate and bias. So why do we do this? Why are we preparing the next generation of educators to do this? We're preparing them to do this so that they would have stood for 14-year-old me. They would have stood for my 4-year-old baby. And we're preparing the next generation of educators to stand for you and your children, because identity matters here at Loyola. Thank you.